Welcome to Complexity Made Simple. My name is Paul Allen, and the subject of today's newsletter, well, I'm going to address the idea of supply chains and COVID-19. People have been asking little questions about this. Would lean have coped? Is lean the problem? All sorts of things in terms of supplying personal protective equipment. So we're going to talk about supply chain, PPE. Now, part of the reason for putting this video up is a little bit to defend the government, for people to understand how difficult this is. And by the way, no system would deal with this. Let's just say that right from the get-go. So, one of the things about lean, a lean supply chain basically does this. It balances flow. So it makes sure that if you are consuming 10,000 pieces per day, you plan to make or supply 10,000 pieces per day. And that's simply the way lean works. The problem with other systems is they blind you to these two simple numbers. So one of the things that lean does is just say, look, things are very simple. There's a very simple demand pattern. Find the simple demand pattern, match it with the supply pattern, and everything will be right in the world. And that's all lean does. It's very, very simple in the way that it asks you to make your supply chain work. Now, of course, all the journalists and the experts are all getting onto the governments all around the world, in the UK in particular. You've not supplied enough PPE. And everybody's saying, oh, you're letting us down, you're letting us down, you're letting us down. Now then, we don't have this currently. This is a situation that is impossible to supply. Why? Because normally the supply pattern would look like that, and it would be relatively fixed with some variability, but it would be relatively fixed. What we now have in this situation, and by the way, this is still worldwide, even today as I make this video, they've just announced we haven't hit the peak yet. So the demand for personal protective equipment around the world is doing that. It is rising exponentially. So today you might need 10,000 pieces a day of equipment, but tomorrow you're probably going to need 15,000 pieces. Then once you've done that, and let's say you can do that, and you've done a fantastic job and you've supplied 15,000 pieces, but the day after 22,000 pieces, and the day after 28,000 pieces, and the day after 40,000 pieces. This thing is just going off the scale. It doesn't matter what you do, you will never supply enough. And if you understand the nature of that curve, you would know not to ask questions like, are you letting the people down? The only question you can really ask is, are you doing enough? Have you come up with every idea? Have we put every resource behind trying to match that curve as much as we can? But that curve will not go away. That curve is never ever seen in supply chains. Even if you were supplying an army and the army went to war, usually the demand would look like this. Military equipment, then you go to war and it would go military equipment. You would only have to ramp up once, usually. But this is a different war. All the politicians, to be honest, are doing the most fantastic job to get as much equipment out of the world supply chains as they possibly can. But at some point, the world supply chains, I'm afraid, are going to let everybody down. This is not an achievable supply chain. The other point to to bear in mind is the idea of, even if you get the supply chain running in the UK, I know I heard I think it was a politician or an expert say it wasn't as many as 500 locations, so less than 500 locations they had to deliver to. They now have to deliver, and I certainly heard the figure of 38,000 this morning. I think they're talking about, there is 58,000 locations they have to deliver PPE to. Normally they deliver to less than 500. So in a normal situation, hospitals, probably intensive care areas, people having specialist cancer treatments where you've killed their immune system and you have to keep them clean and away from any kind of infection at all. That would be those locations where you normally have to send this kind of specialist personal protective equipment. They now, in the UK, this is just in the UK, they have to now get that personal protective equipment to 58,000 locations. So you've got that demand coming from that many locations. If there's an expert somewhere in the world that knows how to do this, I haven't met them yet. So guys, we need to give the politicians, cut them some slack. That is the complexity that they're dealing with, and I have to say, typically I think they're doing the most magnificent job in keeping up with the situation, and of course they're trying to flatten that situation as much as they can, because at some point that bloody thing's going to get away from them, and they're trying to stop it. So supply chain for PPE, it's exponential. There isn't a system in the world can deal with it.